What is going on, guys? Vertivoden here, and we are back with another quote-unquote short video. So today's video is going to be about the uh, Microsoft possibly getting its first union at Zenimax for the quality assurance testers. And this is something that, you know, there's been a few comments and questions, but I didn't really read into it in the last few months. There's been rumblings of this for a while. And then ironically, I saw a video by Nephis, and he's a guy that plays a lot of ESO. And the reason I went to I haven't played ESO in couple months now, I think, and I had signed up for my guild tonight to actually be a healer for one of the new trials that I haven't really finished yet. And I thought, you know what, I should probably brush up on the mechanics. And I saw his video and I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is kind of new. So I looked it up, and there were some comments in there, and I just kind of wanted to put it out there in the space to kind of not only answer some of the questions that I kind of previously dodged because I didn't really look into this, but to kind of make it clear, if I haven't already, I am so very pro union. And I have been pretty much my whole life, because almost everybody in my family had a union job. I mean, there might have been an aunt who's an artist, so I don't know if she was actually in a union. I think she was independent. My mom, who couldn't hold a job for more than a year, I don't ever think she was in a union, but my dad, my uncles, my grandparents, all union people. And I was raised in an environment that talked about how unions give us collective bargaining power against people who own companies, especially very large companies, to ensure that we're not getting exploited, right? Now, there has been way before the Reagan administration in the 80s, but more after deregulation in terms of the transportation industry, that started to see the only trickle down that Reagan talked about when it comes to basically underpaying workers. That's where the trickle down, or voodoo economics, as Bush 1 called it, kind of came into play, and it's been getting steadily worse and worse. And there has been ironically, this massive movement growing over the last 35, 40 years with Republicans who are now very anti-union, where before that was kind of a very bipartisan issue. Both Democrats and Republicans could basically agree on, and both parties supported it up until about, I'd say, the mid to late 70s. We're not going to get too in the weeds on that, because even that I have a general overview and I haven't really brushed up on it. But there was something that I remember, and it was a very, very poignant phrasing or framing of the situation by Michael Moore, actually. I had a book of his out of high school. I want to say it was something like Lying Liars and the Lies They Tell, or something like that. But he starts off the book, and now that I'm thinking about it, that could be the wrong book. But regardless, it was a Michael Moore book where he talked about how, as the transportation industry started, deregulation in the early 80s, if you weren't really alive then or paying attention to politics, what started happening is that you started to see the gross exploitation from investors and board members and CEOs right around the late 80s and 90s, where they started utilizing a get out of free jail card they didn't have available to them until deregulation came along. And they started basically declaring bankruptcy to get out of paying the pensions of all the boomers. And I guess I forget who is before the boomers. I'm not even really sure. But basically started retiring and started cashing in on these promises of pensions. And they were allowed to continue to make a profit, to file, I believe it's under Chapter 11, restructure their quote unquote failing airline systems that were still massively, and to this day, still massively supported by taxpayer funds. Um, and it just snowballed basically, at least on the right. I know there's some discussion of it on the left, but basically this anti-union sentiment started to grow and snowball and get bigger and bigger and bigger, to where it was pretty much non-existent in a lot of the companies that we see today. And it is actually kind of a rarity outside of government jobs, that, or like maybe like longshoremen, postal workers. They're not really federal workers, but kind of classified. And it's just one of those things. It's just sad to see how rare it is. And one of the things that Neff has touched on, and I think he touched on this because there are people that are making a false equivalency with the latest patch that was released apparently on November 1st for ESO Online, which again, I haven't played, so I didn't know, is apparently a huge catastrophe. Now, most updates for ESO when they launch are huge catastrophes. That's just the way the game goes, right? It's a massive MMO that is really old, and it's not, the systems aren't getting really any better because they're all based on very dated structures. And so it's not something new, but I guess what's new is that the turnaround time to fix this is not going to be a few days or a week. It's going to be quite a while. And he couldn't help but wonder that if the growing sentiment of, people unionizing has an effect on this. And I would say absolutely it does. When you are an employee for a company and you're underpaid and you're overworked, that's not necessarily something people enjoy. And that's just across the board. It doesn't matter even if you really love your job and what you do. If you are not getting paid a wage that allows you to not worry about your bills, or have the time off, or have the energy when you have the time off to enjoy that time off, and the money that you're supposedly making, you're going to start doing a shit job, right? It's going to distract you. It's going to cause an immense amount of stress. And that's just one person, let alone an entire department, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of sentiment where people are making the false equivalency that the act of unionization is the cause of this, where I would say actually the need for unionization is born from the cause of being overworked and underpaid, which both contributed to this situation. But the path of unionizing will fix it. And the reason I say this is that, and this is kind of tying back to my tangent with the Michael Moore book, is that he was talking about how these airlines were basically, again, just ripping off these people that had worked for them for 30 and 40 years, telling them that you're putting money into this pension for them, and then purposely seeing how much that's going to cost you and declaring bankruptcy so they don't have to pay you, but they can restructure the company and continue to make money off of the hard work that you've put into the company, right? And I'm not talking about 5 or 6 people. I'm talking about hundreds of pilots of, what's the term for the people who aren't pilots that help you out? Stewards? I don't know. But like all these people, like engineers and the people who are on the runways, like they all got fucked. And I'm not talking I'm talking a lot. And what he had said is that he never, ever felt comfortable getting on a plane where he believed the pilot would have to worry about whether or not they could afford diapers for their kid, or, a medical procedure that they needed, or didn't have the time off that they would need to, if they got a cold or something, right? He doesn't want a pilot piloting the plane who is sick, right? This is just like baseline common sense and decency. And so what we have done with this sort of neoliberal hyper individualism where profit is king, and it's not just specific to America, but I think in America we see some of the grossest sort of expanses of this idea, where basically your only worth as a human being is what you can produce on a daily basis. Like, that's just disgusting in and of itself, right? It's dehumanizing. But that's literally what people were kind of brought up on, and this is what companies and media and the companies that own media sites are telling them, that you need to be hyper individualistic and you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, even though these companies are getting tax breaks left and right and you're not getting any of it. This is why they need to unionize, right? Is to have a dog in the fight. Right now, it's just a one-way fight and they're getting the shit beat out of them. And to kind of bring this home, and people will often try to counter this and say, like, well, if you pay the workers more, then, games are going to cost more. And I'm like, games were already going to cost more. The price of goods and services always keeps up with inflation. Always. It always goes up. There is no stopping that. So for those who believe that somehow we're going to return to an era of 10-cent coffees and $1.25 Denny's Grand Slams, it's never going to happen, right? And to sit here and think that unions are going to somehow explode, like you heard this, I heard this constantly throughout my life. You can't raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour because then McDonald's burgers will be $24. Guess what? $15 is a minimum wage now, federal minimum wage. It's been the minimum wage in several states, including the state that I live in right now, for years. Burgers are still the same, right? They're maybe, 20 cents more than the state next to them? That's it. So this is complete bullshit argument against it. And to kind of drive it home is that I think this guy's probably got links. I don't have a Twitter account, so this may like pop up and say like, oh, you can't see anymore unless you log in. But this guy, Daniel Ahmad, I hope I'm saying his name right. This guy follows the financials pretty close of most companies. But Microsoft's gaming division, now remember, this is just the gaming division, reported revenue $16 billion for 2021. 16 billion for 1 year. And they're still, like they've already said, console exclusives are going up to $70 an hour, right? They wanted to do this years ago, but they pushed back because of the collective feedback that they got from the community, right? Whoops, this is still going to happen now. And now, granted, people say like, well, I spent a lot of this money on acquiring, all these studios and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't mean they should acquire the studios and not pay their employees not a living wage. One person that Nephis quoted, who is, I believe, not only works for the gaming division, works for Zenimax, and is, I want to say, is someone that posts a lot of updates on the PTS. She averaged her hours. She only makes like $25 an hour as a QA tester for one of the world's largest MMOs. I'm a truck driver, right? I'm not in my chosen profession due to COVID. I've been driving truck the last couple of years. All I do is drive a truck from point A to point B a couple times a day. That's it. That's all I do. I don't have to know shit. All I need is a license, right? And a GPS. That's it. I get paid $28 an hour to sit and drive a truck from point A to point B, pick things up, and not get into an accident. That's all I have to do. And yet, quality testers who are working like 60, 65, 70 hours a week are making $25 an hour for one of the world's largest MMOs. So do I think they should unionize? Fucking A.